Hey everyone, this is Mike, and since the patch came out, I've been playing around with Samurai a bit because it received some changes that were a bit interesting, I guess I'll call them. The biggest change that has most Samurai players talking is the removal of Kaiten, but that wasn't the only thing that happened. It is, however, the one that has the biggest impact on our gameplay. So I'll be giving my thoughts on that change as well as the others that have happened, because honestly I think that some of the other changes weren't all that bad. And I'm not talking about number changes here, those are things that you don't feel as you're playing, and they're also easy to adjust if they're too high or too low. So I'm purely talking about gameplay changes here. So what has changed then? Well, removal of Kaiten is the big one, but Third Eye also got an extra second on its duration, making it a little bit more lenient on the timing, and Tenka Goken, the AoE AI Jutsu, is also now a circle AoE instead of a cone in front of you. So let's touch upon those small changes first to get them out of the way quickly. Third Eye. This doesn't really change it too much, but the little bit of extra leniency is welcome. Because there will be times where I would like to use it, but the timing would conflict with some of the other GCTs that I would like to press in that window because it's during my burst or something like that. And then I would have to not use Third Eye because it just wouldn't last long enough. Now, I might be able to use it a GCT earlier and still catch the damage that I was trying to use Third Eye for. It does make it easier to use for the lesser skilled Samurai player, but 1 second isn't really big enough for me to say that it's too easy now. I think this was a good change. As for Tenka Goken, this was something that I saw coming ever since they made our AoE combo starter, also a circle AoE at the start of Endwalker. The only AoE skill that we have left now that is a cone is Oginamakiri, and I don't think that they should change this one as it's something that only comes up every 2 minutes, whereas Tenka Goken is something that you would use a lot during your AoE combos. It makes it a lot more friendly to use because you don't have to reposition all the time and you also don't require a target anymore to use it, and I think this last one is like the biggest quality of life change of them all. So while I get it that it might make the AoE rotation a bit too dull for some people, I think this was a fine change. So we're 2 for 2 on the good changes so far, but then comes the biggest change that actually has a pretty big effect on the gameplay and the feeling of Samurai, and it's of course the one that I don't like at all. Kaiten is an ability that I felt like was very core to the Samurai's feeling, and with it now being gone, I feel like something is missing. Would it never have existed in the first place? I probably wouldn't miss it, because Samurai still feels pretty good, but after having played with it for so many years, it just feels empty now that it's gone. So why did they remove it? Well, the first translation that we got was to go against button bloat, but if this was the case, then why are Shoha 1 and 2 different buttons, and the same goes for Guren and Sene. Those could also be consolidated into one skill. Later, we did find out that they apparently meant APM, actions per minute, the busyness of Samurai that they wanted to address with this. And again, at first I was like, well, this doesn't really change much, because instead of spending your Kenki on Kaiten, you're now spending it on Shinten. And sure, Shinten costs 5 more gauge, but it's not really going to change your overall APM by much though. However, where it does make a significant difference is during your burst windows. Previously, you would need to save a fair amount of gauge to ensure that you could use Kaiten on all your important skills, Midare, Heikenbana and Oginamikiri if it was the 2-minute window, and then you could also save some extra for an extra Shinten underbuffs or something, but at minimum you would need to save for 2 or maybe 3 Kaitens depending on the burst window. Now, you don't need to save any gauge at all if you're doing the bare minimum. I know you can still save for Shinten's underbuffs, but there isn't a real need to do this compared of needing Kaitens, because using an AI Jutsu without Kaiten was a big loss. So it reduces the amount of off-global cooldown usages during your burst windows, which I do have to admit make them a lot less busy. And if that's what they were trying to achieve with this change, then that is exactly what they did. But then I have to ask you, at what cost? The Kenki gauge, which was something that you at least had to give a little bit of attention to, has now become just a Shinten gauge. Before, you'd always want a little bit of a buffer to ensure you could use Kaiten before an AI Jutsu. Now you just spam away at Shinten whenever you can. Setup for your burst window has also gone completely out of the window. Sure, again you can save for Shintens, but the impact that a Shinten has under a raid buff compared to a Kaiten AI Jutsu is quite different, and I'm not just talking from a damage standpoint here. What is more satisfying? Hitting 3 Shintens under a raid buff or hitting 3 Kaiten AI Jutsus? For me, the satisfaction of having saved enough gauge and pulling off a clean burst window is 100 times higher than the non-existing feeling that I get from having saved extra gauge for 2 or 3 extra Shintens under raid buffs. Let alone the aesthetic. It just felt right using that Kaiten, which has you power up to then hit them with that strong casted ability. It just looks and feels so right. And now there's nothing there that makes you feel like you're preparing for a big hit. It just kinda happens and takes away from that feeling that you got before. Is Samurai still fun to play? Yes. Would I like to get Kaiten back? Absolutely. It added extra flair to the class, and while it didn't add a lot of difficulty, it added a lot more satisfaction to the job that I now feel is lacking a little bit. It's still fun to play, and I'll definitely still play it, but I'd rather have to think a little bit extra about how I'm spending my Genki gauge instead of mindlessly hitting that Shinten button. And it just feels like that gauge fills way too fast now as well, because I'm so used to being able to spend it on other things than just Shinten. Sure, you have your gap closer and backstab, but those are things that you don't use that often. But anyways, before this turns into more of a rant than it already is, I would really like to get Kaiten back because it added that little extra to the gameplay that I feel like is missing now. Let me know what you think about the Kaiten change or any of the other changes that have happened for that matter in the comments down below, because I'm quite curious to see what you guys think about the changes, as I know that there are a fair amount of people that do like the Kaiten removal. So let me know your thoughts down below. And with that, I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my patrons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.